The millionaire was on his way to close the biggest deal of his life, until he saw a little boy crying alone on a bench, with eyes exactly like his. Lucas Brady wasn't a man who stopped for anything. His life moved in seconds and deadlines, wrapped in a constant rhythm of meetings, negotiations, and business trips. That particular morning, everything was on track. His driver was taking him to one of the most important meetings of the quarter, a potential merger that could double the reach of his firm. He sat in the back seat of his sleek black Mercedes, dressed in a tailored navy suit, with his phone in one hand and a tablet in the other. His brown curls were neatly combed, his green eyes fixed on the glowing screen in front of him, reviewing figures and graphs with silent focus. His assistant had already messaged 3 times, reminding him of the agenda, the talking points, and the key names he had to impress. Lucas didn't respond. He didn't need reminders. He had built his empire by staying sharp, staying ahead, and staying emotionally detached. They were less than 10 minutes from the meeting when something caught his eye. Out the window, just beyond the blur of traffic and buildings, a small figure sat alone on a park bench. The image was so jarring that he blinked and looked again, expecting the child to be accompanied by a parent or guardian. But there was no one. A little boy, no more than 7 years old, sat hunched on the bench, clutching something in his lap, crying silently with his shoulders shaking. Lucas leaned forward, his instincts battling with his sense of logic. He told himself it was none of his business. That there were systems in place, that someone else would stop. But as the car moved past the boy, he felt something twist in his chest, a sensation so unfamiliar it startled him. He caught one last glimpse of the child's face through the rear window, and his heart stopped. The boy had curly brown hair and unmistakably bright green eyes. Eyes that looked like his own. Lucas didn't think. He acted. "Stop the car," he said suddenly. His driver hesitated. "Sir, we're behind schedule." Lucas's voice was sharp now. "I said stop." The car pulled to the curb. He got out before the door was fully opened, his polished shoes hitting the pavement as he made his way back down the sidewalk, ignoring the confused glances of pedestrians and the buzzing of his phone in his pocket. The boy was still there, looking small and lost against the backdrop of the city. Lucas approached slowly, not wanting to scare him. The boy looked up, startled, and wiped his face with the back of his hand. "Are you okay?" Lucas asked, crouching down to meet him at eye level. The boy didn't answer right away. His lips trembled, and his hands tightened around the stuffed dog in his lap. "Where's your mom or dad?" Lucas asked gently. The boy's voice was barely above a whisper. "She said she'd be right back. She went into the store. But she never came out." Lucas looked around. There were a few small businesses nearby, but no sign of anyone searching for a child. The boy didn't look neglected or uncared for. His clothes were clean, if slightly wrinkled, and the way he sat with his legs tucked under him felt instinctively familiar. Lucas hesitated, his mind trying to sort through this impossible moment. Something about the boy's eyes made him feel like he was staring into a memory he couldn't quite access. "What's your name?" Lucas asked. The boy looked at him, hesitated, then said quietly, "Miles." The name echoed in Lucas's mind. He didn't know why it struck him, but it did. Maybe because it sounded too personal, too close. Maybe because the way the boy looked at him made something in his gut go cold. Lucas pulled out his phone and called the police, reporting a lost child. As he waited, he stayed beside Miles, answering soft questions, offering reassurances, and trying not to stare too hard at those green eyes that made it harder to breathe. When the officers arrived and gently led Miles away, Lucas stood on the sidewalk, unable to move. His driver pulled up, ready to take him to the rescheduled meeting, but Lucas didn't get in. He couldn't shake the image of that small boy sitting alone, or the way it felt to hear him say his name. Lucas had always believed his past was behind him. But in that moment, he felt something crack open. He had seen a child who looked just like him, too much like him for it to be coincidence. And for the first time in years, business could wait. There was something much more important he had to understand. The next morning, Lucas sat alone in his office, staring blankly at the city skyline. The light from the rising sun poured in through the tall windows, illuminating his immaculate desk that, for once, was untouched. No meetings. No calls. No distractions. Just silence. His assistant had asked twice if he was okay, and each time he gave the same answer, "I'm fine." But he wasn't. He couldn't stop thinking about the boy on the bench. Miles. That name, that face, those green eyes, they had embedded themselves into his mind like a splinter he couldn't remove. Lucas prided himself on clarity, but now every thought was fogged by doubt and something close to fear. He had spent most of the previous night doing something he hadn't done in years, looking back. He dug into old email accounts, photo folders, archived contacts. And eventually, he found her. Emily Harper. The name alone brought a flood of memories. She was the woman he had been with years ago, briefly but intensely, before everything fell apart. Before London. Before the company exploded into global relevance. Back then, he'd made a decision, career over connection. It wasn't cold. It was calculated. Necessary. At least, that's what he told himself. When he left, Emily hadn't begged him to stay. She'd simply gone quiet. And he hadn't looked back. Until now. Lucas didn't know for sure that the child was hers. But the possibility was impossible to ignore. The boy's face was too familiar. His name had the kind of poetic touch Emily would have chosen. And the timing, God, the timing made his stomach turn. 7 years. It all lined up too well. He felt foolish for not seeing it earlier. Or maybe he'd just been too focused on building his empire to notice who he had trampled in the process. He reached for his phone and dialed the private investigator he used when business situations got delicate. "I need information on someone," he said as soon as the call connected. "Her name's Emily Harper. Lived in LA 7 years ago. She was a journalist back then. I want to know where she is now. I want to know everything." The voice on the other end didn't ask questions. Lucas paid well for discretion. While he waited, he paced. Restless. Agitated. The same way he felt when a major deal was on the line, except this wasn't about numbers. This was personal. For the first time in years, he didn't care about profits or contracts. He cared about that boy's face. About what had happened to Emily. About whether a decision he made in the name of ambition had left a scar he never knew existed. By the end of the day, the investigator called back. "She's in Santa Rosa," the voice said. "North side of town. Living under the same name. Single. Modest home. Works part-time at a small bookstore. There's a child registered to her address. Name's Miles Harper. Age 7. Lucas felt the air leave his lungs. He sat down slowly, pressing a hand to his chest as though that could calm the storm brewing inside. So it was true. The boy was hers. And most likely his. He spent hours debating what to do. Show up. Call her. What if she slammed the door in his face? What if she didn't want him anywhere near them? He had every legal right to find out, to demand answers, even to pursue custody if it came to that. But he didn't want to force anything. Not after everything she'd been through. Not after the fear and heartbreak he'd seen on that boy's face. That night, he sat in his penthouse surrounded by wealth and silence, and for the first time in his life, none of it felt like enough. He poured himself a glass of whiskey but didn't drink it. He just stared into the glass, thinking of how different his life could have been if he'd chosen differently back then. Not better, not worse, just fuller. Realer. Something with more meaning than shares and stocks. He went to bed with one thought in his mind: tomorrow, he would go to Santa Rosa. He didn't know what he would say. He didn't know if he would be welcome. But he had to look her in the eyes. He had to see his son again. And maybe, for the first time, he had to face the version of himself he left behind. The drive to Santa Rosa felt longer than it actually was. Lucas kept the windows slightly cracked despite the chill in the air, needing something to remind him he was still in motion. The highway stretched ahead of him in a blur of trees and distant hills, but his mind was locked on one point, Emily. He hadn't said her name aloud in years, hadn't thought of her face except in fleeting memories he always pushed aside. But now, those memories came rushing back with sharp clarity. He remembered the way she used to laugh at his dry sense of humor, how she would sit cross-legged in the middle of the bed, a pen tucked behind her ear as she edited articles late into the night. He remembered her stubbornness, her warmth, her quiet strength. And he remembered leaving all of that behind without a second thought, believing he was doing the right thing. Now, he wasn't so sure. When he pulled into the neighborhood the investigator had described, he immediately noticed how different it felt from his world. Small homes lined the quiet street, with trimmed lawns and kids' bikes lying in front yards. It wasn't wealthy, but it was well cared for. Real. Lived in. He parked across the street from a small pale blue house with a white fence and a crooked mailbox. It wasn't remarkable, but something about it made his heart race. He sat in the car for several minutes, gripping the steering wheel tightly, unsure how to walk up to the door and ask the question that had haunted him since yesterday. What do you say to someone you left behind, not knowing she might have been carrying your child? Finally, he stepped out and crossed the street. His footsteps were heavy, like the weight of 7 years pressed down on every step. He raised his hand to knock, but hesitated. Then the door opened. Emily stood there, holding a stack of books, clearly surprised to see someone on her porch. For a moment she didn't recognize him. And then she did. The books slipped slightly in her arms. Her expression changed slowly, surprise, then disbelief, and then a guarded stillness. Lucas? Her voice was quiet, almost disbelieving. He nodded, suddenly unsure of every word he had planned. Hi, Emily. She stepped back slightly but didn't invite him in. The air between them was charged with everything unsaid. He tried again. I know this is unexpected. I didn't come to cause trouble. I saw him. Yesterday. Miles. I didn't know. Not until then. Emily's face didn't soften. She closed the door partially, as if shielding something. You saw Miles. How? Lucas explained, about the meeting he missed, the bench, the tears, the eyes that mirrored his own. He told her he called the police, stayed with him until help arrived, and that something in him knew the truth before any words were said. Emily listened in silence, her jaw tight. When he finished, she looked away, toward the street, then back at him with a tired expression. I tried to tell you, she said, and it wasn't bitter, it was just true. I called. I emailed. You changed your number. You left and disappeared into your career, and I didn't have the strength to chase you. Lucas felt the blow of that. Not from anger, but regret. Deep and gnawing. I didn't know. If I had. She stopped him with a look. Would you have come back? Or would you have written a check and flown to Tokyo? The question silenced him. He didn't know the answer. Not honestly. Not then. She stepped fully outside, closing the door behind her now. I didn't tell Miles about you. I didn't want him to grow up waiting for someone who might never show up. He's a good kid. He deserves stability. I'm not here to take him away, Lucas said quickly, desperate to stop whatever fear had risen in her. I want to know him. If he'll let me. And if you'll let me. Emily studied him, her eyes not angry but cautious. Why now? Because I saw his face, Lucas said quietly. And I couldn't forget it. Because I've done a lot of things in my life that I thought mattered. But nothing's ever hit me the way seeing him did. She exhaled slowly. Her guard didn't fully drop, but she nodded toward the street. He's at school. He'll be home at 3. If you're still here, you can talk to him. Lucas swallowed hard, nodding. I'll be here. And with that, she turned and went back inside, leaving him on the porch, heart pounding, feeling more like a man than a mogul for the first time in years. Lucas waited in his car across the street, watching the small blue house as the afternoon light shifted slowly toward evening. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt this unsettled, his confidence so thoroughly stripped away. He wasn't a man used to waiting. He was used to controlling time, directing outcomes, making things happen. But today, he sat quietly, knowing that no amount of power or money could buy what he was about to ask for. At exactly 3:10, he saw Emily step outside, looking both composed and nervous. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest, her eyes scanning the street until they landed on him. She gave a small nod, a silent signal that he could come. He crossed the street slowly, his steps heavier now that the moment had arrived. As he approached, he noticed the sound of voices inside the house, light, playful. Then a door opened behind Emily, and Miles stepped out. The boy's backpack was nearly half his size, his hair a mess of brown curls, and his green eyes lit with curiosity and energy. He didn't see Lucas at first. He was talking about his day, showing Emily something from his pocket, completely unaware of the tension in the air. But when he looked up and saw Lucas standing just a few steps away, he froze. Lucas didn't move closer. He crouched slightly, trying not to look overwhelming. "Hey," he said gently. "Do you remember me?" Miles looked at his mother, then back at Lucas. His voice was cautious but clear. "You're the man from the bench." Lucas nodded. "Yeah. I'm glad you remember." Emily glanced at her son. "Miles, this is Lucas. He's someone very important." She hesitated, then added, "He's your father." The words hit the air like a silent explosion. Miles looked stunned, blinking slowly, as if trying to process a concept too big for his age. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he tilted his head, studying Lucas in a way that was far too serious for a 7-year-old. "You look like me," he finally said. Lucas smiled, though his heart felt fragile in that moment. "I was thinking the same thing." Miles turned to Emily. "You said my dad was gone." Emily knelt beside him, her voice calm but emotional. "I did. Because for a long time, I didn't know if he would ever come back. But now he's here, and I think he wants to try." There was silence for a moment. The air was thick with uncertainty, layered with emotion none of them had words for. Then, very slowly, Miles took a step forward. Not much. Just enough to close part of the distance between them. Lucas didn't reach out. He didn't want to push. He simply let the boy lead. And after another long pause, Miles said, "Can you stay for dinner?" Lucas felt something shift in his chest. Not dramatic or explosive, just a deep, steady warmth that spread through him like sunlight after a long winter. He looked at Emily, who gave a slow nod. "I'd like that," he said softly. Inside, the house was small but full of warmth. The kitchen smelled like roasted chicken and garlic. Miles talked non-stop once he got comfortable, telling Lucas about his school, his teacher, the science project he was excited to start. Lucas listened intently, memorizing every detail, nodding, laughing when Miles made a joke, asking follow-up questions like every moment was a gift. Emily moved quietly around them, still watching, still uncertain, but slowly letting her guard down. After dinner, they played a board game on the living room floor. Miles sat between them, switching back and forth between focusing and giggling, clearly happy in a way that made Lucas feel both overwhelmed with joy and crushed with guilt. He had missed 7 years of this. 7 years of birthdays and stories and scraped knees. But tonight, he wasn't missing anything. When it was time for bed, Miles yawned and leaned against Emily, then turned to Lucas. "Are you gonna come back?" Lucas swallowed hard. "If it's okay with you and your mom, I'd like to." Miles nodded. "Okay. But bring dessert next time." Lucas laughed, blinking back tears. "You got it." As Emily walked him to the door, she stood with her arms folded, her expression softer now, tired but not closed off. "He's never had a man in his life like this," she said. "Don't make promises if you're not going to keep them." "I won't," Lucas said. "I can't change the past, Emily. But I can show up now. Every day." She didn't say anything else. But she opened the door for him, and that alone felt like a beginning. Lucas stepped out into the night, the air crisp and still. And for the first time in a very long time, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Over the following weeks, Lucas became a fixture in Miles's life. It started with short visits, an hour here, a weekend afternoon there, but soon it became a routine that neither of them wanted to break. Lucas showed up for school drop-offs, sat through early morning soccer practices wrapped in a scarf and coffee, and began learning the names of Miles's friends, teachers, and even his favorite cartoon characters. The more time they spent together, the more natural it felt. It was strange at first, navigating conversations and routines that didn't revolve around contracts or business strategy, but Lucas quickly found himself adapting. He started waking up with more energy, looking forward to Saturday mornings filled with pancakes and crayons instead of conference calls. He'd spent his whole life chasing the next deal, the next level, and now he was realizing what it meant to simply be still with someone who didn't care about any of that, someone who just wanted him to show up and stay. Miles warmed to him more quickly than Lucas had dared hope. At first, the boy had watched him carefully, unsure if this new presence in his life was permanent. But Lucas's consistency began to wear down the edges of that caution. He showed up when he said he would. He remembered the details that mattered to a 7-year-old, the stuffed animal Miles couldn't sleep without, the way he liked his apple slices cut, the fact that he hated ketchup but loved mustard. And slowly, Miles stopped asking if he was coming back next week and started saying, "See you tomorrow," like it was the most natural thing in the world. Emily watched all of this from a quiet distance. At first, she stayed close during visits, sitting in the room or working nearby, listening with half an ear, ready to step in if things became awkward or difficult. But she soon realized she didn't need to. Lucas was patient, present, and gentle in a way she hadn't expected. He didn't push himself into their lives with grand gestures. Instead, he quietly found a place within it, respecting her boundaries and earning her trust one quiet act at a time. He helped clean up after dinner, folded laundry when she wasn't looking, and once left a brand new pair of sneakers by the door when he noticed Miles's old ones had a hole. No speeches. No explanations. Just quiet support. One evening, after Miles had gone to bed, Emily and Lucas sat in the living room with mugs of tea between them. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was familiar, almost comforting. Emily was the first to speak. "You're really trying," she said, her voice low but certain. Lucas nodded, not pretending to misunderstand. "I have a lot to make up for." "You do," she agreed, but her tone wasn't sharp. It was tired, maybe even forgiving. "But you're doing more than I thought you would. I expected you to come once, maybe twice, then vanish." "I almost did," he admitted. "Not because I wanted to, but because I didn't think I deserved to be part of this. I still don't know if I do." "You don't have to be perfect," she said after a moment. "You just have to be here. And not leave again." Lucas looked down at his mug, then at her. "I won't leave." It wasn't a promise made from guilt or fear. It was a decision. A truth he had come to on his own. He was starting to understand what fatherhood meant, not just showing up, but changing. Not just claiming a title, but becoming someone worthy of it. That night, when he left, Miles was already asleep. But Lucas paused by his bedroom door, looking in at the boy curled under the covers, his breathing steady and peaceful. Lucas felt something settle deep in his chest, a kind of peace that had eluded him for years. He had found something real, and for the first time, he was ready to fight for it with everything he had. Back in his penthouse, the silence no longer felt like power or luxury. It just felt empty. He poured himself a glass of water, looked out at the sparkling city skyline, and realized he no longer felt connected to it. His world had shifted. And all he could think about was how many moments he had left to earn, one day at a time. It was a rainy Friday afternoon when Lucas received the call that would change everything. He had just finished a long meeting at his office and was preparing to drive to Emily's house to pick up Miles for their usual weekend together. His phone rang just as he reached for his keys, and the moment he saw Emily's name on the screen, something in him tensed. Her voice was calm but strained. She told him that Miles had gotten into a fight at school, nothing serious, no one hurt, but it was enough that the principal had called her in. Apparently, another student had said something cruel about Miles not having a real dad, and Miles had pushed him. Lucas's heart dropped as she spoke, not because he was angry, but because he understood the weight of those words and what they must have stirred in a 7-year-old boy still learning what family even meant. By the time Lucas arrived, Miles was already home, curled up on the couch with a blanket wrapped around him and his eyes red from tears he was no longer shedding. Emily sat nearby, her expression tight, clearly torn between frustration and worry. Lucas entered the room slowly, not wanting to make anything worse. Miles didn't look at him at first. Lucas sat beside him, close but not too close, and waited a moment before speaking. "You want to tell me what happened?" Miles didn't answer right away. He tugged at the edge of the blanket, staring at the floor. When he finally spoke, his voice was small and uneven. "They said I don't have a real dad. They said my dad didn't want me." Lucas felt something crack inside him at those words. It wasn't just pain, it was fury, helplessness, and guilt all at once. He took a slow breath and placed a hand gently on Miles's back. "I'm sorry anyone made you feel that way. But they're wrong. You have a real dad. I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere." Miles looked up at him then, his eyes wet again, but there was something different this time, something like hope. Lucas leaned forward slightly. "Do you believe me?" Miles hesitated, then gave a tiny nod. Lucas smiled, but it was a sad smile, full of all the things he wished he could undo. After putting Miles to bed that night, Lucas and Emily stood in the hallway, both silent for a long time. The house was quiet except for the soft sound of rain against the windows. Emily leaned against the wall, her arms crossed, but her posture wasn't defensive, it was tired. "This is the part one was afraid of," she said. "Not the visits or the bonding. The moment when it would get complicated. When he would start asking questions I can't always answer." Lucas nodded, understanding more than she realized. "I should have been there from the beginning. I should have known. But I can't go back. All I can do now is show him that I'm not going anywhere again." Emily looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, she let her shoulders fall. "You're doing better than I expected." Lucas took a breath, then said something he hadn't said before. "I'm thinking about stepping back from the company. Not entirely. But enough to be here more. For him. For you." She blinked, caught off guard. "That's a big decision." "I know. But he's more important. You're more important. I've built an empire and sat at the top of it alone. I don't want that anymore." Emily didn't respond right away, but she didn't shut down either. "I don't know what this is between us, Lucas. I don't know if I can trust it." He nodded. "Then let me prove it." Not with promises. With time. That night, for the first time, she let him stay. Not because he asked. Not because Miles wanted it. But because a part of her wanted it too. They didn't talk much more. They just sat on the couch after the house went quiet, watching the rain, and letting the stillness speak for them. There were no declarations, no grand resolutions, just a slow, quiet understanding that something was changing. And for once, it didn't feel rushed or uncertain. It felt like the beginning of something they were both willing to fight for. Winter came in quietly that year, creeping into town with gray skies, bare trees, and a kind of stillness that made everything feel a little closer, a little softer. Lucas began spending most of his nights at Emily's house, not because it was officially decided, but because it had started to feel like home. The spare key she had given him sat in his pocket like a promise, though he rarely used it since she had started leaving the door unlocked when she knew he was coming. Miles had stopped asking whether Lucas would be there in the morning. He just expected it, and the simple trust in that was more meaningful to Lucas than any title or accomplishment he had ever earned. Their routine settled into a rhythm that felt natural. Mornings were messy and beautiful, Lucas making lopsided pancakes while Emily braided Miles's hair for school dress-up days, the boy giggling as syrup stuck to everything. Evenings were slower, filled with books, homework spread across the kitchen table, and conversations about nothing and everything. Lucas found himself reading bedtime stories with different voices for each character, learning how to pack school lunches that didn't come home untouched, and discovering that Miles could talk for 10 minutes straight about dinosaurs without taking a breath. He soaked in all of it like a man who had been starving for years. Emily was still cautious, but she smiled more now. She laughed at his terrible jokes and touched his arm when she passed by him in the hallway. The warmth between them had returned slowly, without declarations or drama, just in glances and shared tasks and quiet gratitude. One night, after a particularly chaotic dinner where Lucas had accidentally used salt instead of sugar in the cornbread, Emily laughed so hard she had to sit down. Lucas had stood there stunned, then doubled over in laughter himself, and when the two of them finally calmed down, they looked at each other and something shifted, something real and tender and unspoken. Neither of them said anything then, but they didn't have to. It was already happening. As Christmas approached, Miles made a wish list that was more about time than toys. One item said, more family movie nights, and another said, stay home more days with Mom and Dad. Lucas read it late one night, tucked into the couch beside the tree, the only light coming from the colored bulbs wrapped around it. He folded the paper carefully and kept it in his wallet. That list meant more to him than any contract he had ever signed. One cold evening, after Miles had gone to bed, Lucas found Emily in the living room folding laundry. He sat beside her and took one of the little t-shirts from the pile, folding it carefully. She looked over at him and said quietly, "Do you ever regret it? Not just leaving, but coming back." He shook his head immediately. "I regret the time I lost. But not this. Not being here now." She was silent for a moment, then said, "You're not the same man you were." "I'm not," he said honestly. "I don't want to be." She leaned against him slightly, and he let out a slow breath. "Sometimes I wish I could go back and do it differently," she admitted. Lucas turned to her. "If we hadn't gone through what we did, I don't know if we'd be sitting here now. I think I had to lose you to realize what it meant to have you." That night, Emily didn't sleep on the opposite side of the bed. She curled up next to him, her hand resting lightly on his chest, and for the first time since they were young and unprepared and full of impossible dreams, it felt right. Not perfect. Not easy. But right. In the days that followed, something subtle changed. They stopped pretending they were just co-parenting. They made plans together. Lucas began to look for homes with a bigger backyard, somewhere they could start fresh. Emily didn't push him away when he offered. Instead, she walked beside him through open houses and let herself imagine what a life might look like if she truly believed he was going to stay. There was no dramatic moment, no grand gesture. Just a slow building of something sturdy. Lucas learned that love wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was quiet, like waiting by the school gate, or remembering which flavor of juice Miles liked best, or falling asleep with someone's hand in yours and not needing to say anything at all. The wedding was small, not because it had to be, but because that's how they wanted it. Lucas could have rented an entire vineyard or flown everyone to a private island, but instead, he and Emily chose the backyard of their new home, the one with the bigger porch and the swing set that Miles had helped build with his own hands. It was early spring, the kind of day where the air still held a little chill, but the sun was out just enough to promise something warmer. The grass was soft beneath the chairs, the flowers simple and real, wild daisies and soft roses, nothing extravagant. Emily wore a dress the color of cream, elegant and quiet, and Miles, in a tiny gray suit with a crooked tie, held her hand as he walked her down the makeshift aisle. Lucas stood waiting under a simple wooden arch, strung with soft white lights. His heart raced as he watched them approach, but not from nerves. He felt grounded in a way he never had before. He wasn't looking for an escape or planning the next move. He was exactly where he was meant to be. When Emily reached him, she gave him that smile, the one that had changed everything all those years ago, and Lucas knew, without a doubt, that every choice that led to this moment, even the painful ones, had brought him home. They spoke their vows without scripts. Emily went first, her voice steady but thick with emotion. She didn't talk about forever or perfection. She talked about showing up, about choosing each other every day, even when it was hard. She talked about forgiveness and friendship and raising a boy who had taught them both how to be brave. Lucas followed, taking her hands and looking into her eyes like there was no one else in the world. He spoke about second chances, about how he had once measured his worth in power and now measured it in the quiet moments, laughter at bedtime, the way she looked in the morning light, the sound of their son's footsteps running down the hall. He promised to stay, not just in body, but in heart, in effort, in everything that mattered. They kissed to the sound of gentle applause, not from a crowd of hundreds, but from a circle of close friends and neighbors who had watched them grow into this new version of themselves. Miles cheered loudest of all, racing toward them after the ceremony and throwing his arms around both of them. "Now we're officially a team," he said proudly, and they all laughed, because it was the kind of joy that felt big enough to burst. The reception was held under strings of lights and a sky that faded into stars. They danced slowly, not caring who watched, and later sat around a fire pit with marshmallows and old stories. Lucas looked around at the home they'd created, at the family they'd become, and felt the kind of peace that didn't demand anything but presence. He thought of the man he used to be, so obsessed with control and success, and realized he wouldn't trade a single quiet evening with Emily and Miles for all the boardrooms in the world. Life after that wasn't perfect. There were still long days, misunderstandings, messy rooms, and bills to pay. But there was also laughter, warmth, soft hands reaching for his in the dark, and a boy who no longer asked if he would come back, because now he knew he always would. Lucas never stopped being a businessman, but he stopped letting that define him. He became a husband, a father, and someone who understood that real legacy isn't built in towers or titles. It's built in bedtime stories and morning hugs, in showing up again and again for the people who need you most. And on nights when the world went quiet, and he sat beside Emily with a sleeping child down the hall, he often whispered a silent thank you to whatever force had made him look out the window that day, to the boy on the bench who changed everything with a pair of green eyes and a heart wide open. In my opinion, the ending of this story is quietly powerful and deeply earned. It doesn't rely on dramatic twists or sudden redemption but instead honors the slow, real work of healing, trust, and reconnection. Lucas's transformation is not just about discovering he has a son, it's about learning how to truly show up for someone, consistently and without conditions. What makes the ending so satisfying is that it's grounded in everyday moments, bedtime stories, small laughter, shared routines, and honest effort. The wedding isn't a fairy tale escape, it's a symbol of rebuilding, of choosing love after pain, and creating something new from broken pieces. The story reminds us that family isn't defined by timing or perfection, but by presence, forgiveness, and the courage to begin again.